Welcome to the AI Pulse podcast, where facts meet fiction and actually hype takes a backseat. Now, I'm your host, Max Vermeer, and today I'm together with my co-host, Marlena. We're not just wading into another wave of AI think pieces, we're going straight into the trenches. Now, to set the scene for today's episode, MIT drops its Iceberg Report end of November 2025, and suddenly everybody's talking about an invisible $1 trillion current that are pulling on the economy. White collar disruption hidden beneath the surface, stretching far beyond the usual suspects that you see on the coast when it comes to disruption of this kind. Now, the Iceberg Report isn't just there for headline fodder. It actually measures how the workforce is exposed to AR's often invisible reach. And instead of cutting jobs lost or robots in factories, it looks at the overlap between what humans do and what AI can already do today. And this actually revealed a risky skill gap and some blind spots that our currently traditional economy is just not able to kind of catch in its stats. To make that specific, the study actually estimates that the current AI systems are already capable of performing tasks equivalent to close to 12% of the US workforce. That represents approximately 1.2 trillion in wages that could be replaced by technology. That's quite a massive number. Now, it does feel a bit like you're realizing you've been playing on level one while there's a whole campaign map lurking below. And yet, only a few months ago, another MIT bombshell, the infamous 95% of AI pilots fail statistic, that LinkedIn feeds into a collective existential crisis. I unpacked that frenzy on my blog. You'll find the link in the description below. And the data says it's not AI that's not working. It's actually warning us that dropping a tool into your organization and hoping for magic is actually the ultimate rookie mistake. So today, we're going to skip and forget about the armchair theorizing. We're skipping ahead to Captain Picard saying, make it so, and getting into the details. And to do that, we're bringing on somebody who's braved the transformation gauntlet and actually lived to tell the tale. You hear from a real veteran, someone who survived more AI project plot twists than a Black Mirror season, with some hard-won lessons from the business front lines. So why do some companies get ROI while others are just lost at sea? Why do the headlines always miss the critical nuance? Spoiler alert, it's not about the technology. It's about the execution, the adaptation, and actually empowering people. And how do you spot the difference in this landscape where everything's constantly being hyped up and you find the actual genuine value just in time to make your next career move a defining one? So whether you're trying to avoid the 95% fail rate or you just want your AI transformation to go a little bit more Tony Stark and a little less Titanic, you want to stick around. Now let's kick it off with some introductions. Travis, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's awesome to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, awesome to have you here, Travis. And as Max already pointed out, you're a veteran in the digital transformation space. And I mean, this term, I think, has been around since 2011 or even earlier. And according to the buzz or according to marketing, we should be past it by now already. But honestly, it still feels like we're right in the middle of it, just operating at a higher level. And generative AI has completely shifted the pace and the possibilities. And this isn't just regular change that is happening anymore. It feels like we've really entered a whole new wave where technology is more accessible, more powerful, and a lot more disruptive. So Travis, how do you see it? Has generative AI truly accelerated things in a meaningful way? And what makes this wave feel different from earlier ones, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as a technologist, we often try to frame like the art of the possible. When I talk to our customers, it's, previously it was like, let me show you these cool technology tools and I'm going to tell you about the art of the possible, customer. And it's kind of interesting now. Now we see the customer telling us like, hey, here is what we think is possible. Here's what we've tried and we've gotten some success with and we know is primarily possible or we're hearing is possible. And so that's kind of interesting that we're seeing this switch in mind frame where our customers are telling us, we want to do this. Now, can you fulfill our dream? It's not us kind of showcasing a bunch of cool technology tools. It's now our customers coming back to us and telling us what they expect, which is kind of a different frame of twist of thinking and how we approach our solutioning, approach our product offerings and those sort of things. So very disruptive in the way that we just conduct kind of the nature of selling and showcasing and servicing these solutions. That said, I do think it becomes the ability for us to find spots to level up, right? So instead of being necessarily technology experts, now we really need to become solutioning experts. We need to become business vertical experts. And, not to get this on a sales tangent, but that's actually kind of where, we at Naviant have decided to go, because we're seeing that customers have high expectations of these tools. And maybe it's not necessarily they're out selecting tools, but they're actually out selecting expertise.
That's actually something I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into. You mentioned the expertise. That's what they're currently selecting, which tracks really well with, the evolution of the short time span that we've seen in the market too.
Yeah.
Another thing that for me personally has been changing a lot, again, we've seen it before, is the build versus buy decision.
That's a great point.
Is that something that you're seeing as well, Travis, that's truly impacting also, I guess, the selection criteria for who they're going to select and which experience that they're going to select to work with?
Absolutely. So it's kind of interesting too. A lot of our opportunity customers are coming to us almost with this bravery that we can build it, Travis. Why would we buy it from you? And the interesting part there is, I think once the humility settles, that's kind of where you start looking at the maturity of the market. These are why you find the leaders in the Gartner matrices and all those sort of things. You find who the proper implementation partners are, because I think it's very easy, very tempting to get into the build scenario, but really plugging in what we at Naviant call our last mile, going the last mile, where you really do have to prove and make these technologies work together. That's the frame of thought for us is, hey, look, we know you're smart. We know these tools are very capable, but given the facts of the failure rates of the AI tooling, maybe perhaps we should engage to help you go that last mile.
These sometimes scared them a little bit with some tales of old when, all of the companies that I think all three of us have worked with before had to go through migration projects, decommissioning, stuff that they've built no longer maintainable. Is it worth telling them that story, or are they super convinced that they'll just be able to pull it off this time? Maintenance in 2, 3, 4, 5 years time will be absolutely fine.
Well, I think it's always worth telling the story. What I also like to tell our customers is, look, when you go into the build mind frame, you're forgetting a lot of the power of true mature applications. Even things as basic as user management, reporting, kind of these old boring concepts, but that are actually really critical to every business process. And when you go into the build mind frame, you're just thinking about an outcome. You're not thinking about how you manage the full process. And that's where a maturity of like an ABBYY solution does give us that ability to really build out a full business process, rather than just, making an OCR call or, getting the results from a chat GPT sort of API scenario comes into play. We now have the ability to manage users, manage the human in the loop, manage reporting. And now we have a formal business process discussion rather than a tooling.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And if I asked you to share a story like that, where, technology really changed how this customer that you work with operated, and if you could share a little bit about what the before looked like and what it looked like afterwards. And what I'm really interested in is that kind of like bit of the setup that I talked about at the beginning. Was it truly about the technology changing the way, or was that a helping hand? And it was truly about transforming the organization, or was it a bit of both? I always love hearing about the mixture of the processes, the technology itself, and also the willingness for people to actually change the way they work. Because I think, in my mind, that's usually where it starts.
Yeah. I have a really fun story with a large healthcare payer. Here at Naviant, we've created kind of this solution called a health claims accelerator. So there are common claim forms in the United States that we use for providers to report to insurance payers what they're going to be claiming for a service. And we've created a claims accelerator on top of the ABBYY platform. And we've actually implemented this at a payer recently, where we've saved them $1.6 million annually and just resourcing, just across the board. And part of that capability is like, a lot of these bigger organizations end up in this legacy mindset where, they kind of implemented technology that is 10 or 15 years old. And, even things as basic as like the old school dropout colors, and things like that, that we really don't have a consequence with those today. We actually prefer that we have text on documents because we use machine learning models that want text, those sort of things. So this is a payer that they were processing like 35 million claims and implemented ABBYY IDP technology to assist with the recognition, the extraction, the automation of EDI into their backend systems. But this is also an interesting scenario too, because you would think, well, if these are common forms, can't we just post this to like a Gen AI platform, Travis? Like, do we really need the platform? And the reality is yes, you do. You do want the reporting. You do want human in the loop. Oh, and don't forget, a lot of our larger organizations still have a very complex mailroom operation. So they still have documents. The common denominator is paper, my friends, and paper is going to come into these organizations. And there are mail rooms. There are jobs and jobs of humans that are just responsible for scanning, splitting, putting separator sheets. Just literally as documents flow into an organization, the very first step from the post office to their front door. And that's kind of the beauty of the platform, is now we've been able to implement this automation where we're helping reduce the demand on the mailroom. We're classifying the documents, we're extracting the information, we're engaging a human if and only if we need it. We're exporting to EDI, we're automating other correspondence that's coming in, not just claims. And now we're expanding that capability. So this was a substantial project for us, a substantial project in just value for our customer.
Super interesting. And actually, that leads me to my next question, which is about lessons learned. And one pattern we've seen is companies really jumping into new technologies without really understanding the why. And they get excited, about the tools, but they don't really define the purpose, the outcomes they actually want at the first step. And then the project turns into this tech exercise instead of real transformation. But then there are those organizations, that get it right and they're intentional, they're clear on value, and they somehow move past those hurdles and in comparison to everyone else. So from your experience, what separates those two groups? So what are the lessons you've learned about what successful organizations do differently from the ones that keep struggling?
Yeah. A couple of points there I think I would just mention is change management and understanding the people concept and the consequences and the benefits to our staff and to our customer staff is just critical. A lot of times when we talk about top-down sort of projects, we don't always understand the impact to the human or to the job. And I've seen this over and over again in my career where we implement purely from a technology perspective, and then we forget that there's actually a business happening and there's humans that have to operate, and there's customers and there's downstream consequences that revolve around humans. So I would say that's substantial. So change management and then just understanding how people become a consequence of our decisions is important. Secondly, some of our more successful adopters of AI and IDP have been those that have really put some time into a center of excellence, like road mapping, understanding like a kind of a cool heat map for our organizations. Where do we think adoption can come into place easily with our different technologies? So the center of excellence, I would think there. And then lastly, this is the value of a consulting partner like Naviant, where not only do we understand the technology, but we have the ability to come in and create what actually we've termed a blueprint, where we can look at your different processes and maybe even a specific process and determine where automations, not just AI, not just IDP, maybe there's an RPA play, maybe there's a document storage or ECM play there, but where we could truly, as a consulting partner, make an impact for our clients. And therefore, we get out of this lessons learned and into this, how do we adopt things intelligently? How do we implement technology intelligently and make it, years of impact for our customers?
So you talked about those blueprints, Travis, and that's really what you're striving to work together on with the customers. I was wondering, are you seeing kind of a correlation of different blueprints that people are asking for? Is there a top of mind item at the moment? Again, speaking from my experience, I was working on invoice transformation projects, accounts payable, and when I was doing that, I'll admit it, more than 12 years ago now, I was thinking like, okay, everybody's got to have that figured out in like the next 1, 2, maybe 3 years. Every organization is going to have this entirely figured out. Lo and behold, we're going into 2026. Everybody is still trying to figure out
Still
some of
one of
these
our most
basics.
popular inquiries, right? So,
Most popular inquiries to this day. And, I love hearing the healthcare story. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's like a perfect candidate for that type of transformation. But, again, I'll come back to my question. I see these kind of things continue to come back that you would think like everybody's figured this out by now.
yeah.
And yet again, I wonder if there's like other, honestly, more interesting use cases or blueprints that you guys are working on that you see coming back more and more with customers as the technology is shifting so quickly. And also, I guess maybe their expectations are shifting as well as to what the technology can do. You already mentioned like they're coming to you this time about the art of the possible. What blueprint are they really asking for? Is there like a certain kind of range that you're seeing repetitively across the market?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. It's actually kind of the whole purpose of this blueprint foundation for us is like we don't want to enter into a product only mindset. When we do that, we actually are not good consultants to you as a business. And the kind of the architecture of the blueprint is that it gives us the ability to essentially assign a consultant that is a process only consultant. Their job is to look at that process, not technology, look at the process and confirm where adoption can be applied, where there's a change management scenario, where we want to implement some sort of technology. So, it's kind of interesting because you mentioned invoice processing and frankly, it's the part that never goes away. It's actually kind of true with our claims, our healthcare claims accelerators, the same thing. 10 years ago, I would have thought we'd be doing that by now, right? And not that we haven't made it innovative, we of course have, but it's still this topic that comes up over and over again. So, that's kind of the architecture of the blueprint for us is let's actually take a consultative partner approach first, and then we'll decide where and when and what product we can plug in. AP is continuing to be very popular. The health insurance play on both the provider and the payer. So things like your doctor's office, a hospital firm versus, the insurance payment. And there's different avenues that we can take there from a blueprinting perspective. So we actually have blueprints established for both payer and provider. We have blueprints in state and legislature and education and those sorts of things. So yeah, we're just trying to get out of this product mindset and into a solutioning mindset.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the right approach. And so, speaking of getting into the right mindset, it always also involves the employees and their expectation as well, not just the business leaders that have to kind of define, okay, these are the outcomes that we want for the business, but it's the people on the floor that are actually doing it. So how do you see their expectations changing currently? Because let's be honest, even my mom has access to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Scares the living bejesus out of me. I'll say that. But it also means that this technology is kind of seeped into the mainstream, which is, I think, something that before we never had. IDP technology, RPA, machine learning, all of that was never mainstream. That's something that us tech geeks around this table right here were using to figure out the problems that the businesses had and automate them. But how is that really, that mainstream of that technology really changed the expectations, the people that are going to have to work with these solutions that you're going to put together?
I mean, I think it's created a whole new excitement in the work field. But, just from a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis or what we automate for our clients are very monotonous, sort of repeatable tasks, right? Whether it's an RPA sort of play where we can throw a bot at it or we want to extract information. So it's just created this brand new excitement. But I think what we're seeing is the employee now has the ability to be part of the strategic technology conversation. We've been approached by business users that are saying, "Hey, we tried this with ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or something like that, and now, Travis, how can we put together a plan to executively present this to the team, to our internal team?" So we're now seeing the employees become part of their strategic planning. And they're being involved in some of the tooling and some of the UAT and POCs of those sort of tooling as well. So it's actually quite a bit of this concept of removing away from this kind of monotonous, repetitive task into this more exciting new world where, we are actually part of using our minds to solve problems.
Yeah, exciting times. And Travis, we always have a crystal ball question at the end. And so when I look ahead 3 or 5 years, maybe, I personally don't think technology alone will define who wins or who has the advantage. I actually think things like critical human thinking, good judgment, and a strong data foundation will become the real differentiators. And with how fast Gen AI and IDP are evolving, it feels like organizations need really to start preparing, architecting for this. So basically, the human in the loop plays a critical role. So the crystal ball question to you is, what do you think? What excites you most about where of all of this is heading? And what do you think businesses should be preparing for now?
Yeah. I'm almost scared to watch this answer 3 or 5 years from
Yeah.
now, because everything's just changing so much. And, I guess that's part of my answer is the speed of the gains that we're experiencing as part of this are going to just be transformational continuously. I do think there will be a reduction in the workforce for that normal kind of operator sort of user, or it may be an outsource capability or an offshoring capability. But I don't necessarily see a kind of just data entry sort of personnel being part of our day-to-day life. I think it is going to become the critical thinking. It's going to become the architect. It's going to be the person that's played around with the tools. And I'm not talking technologists, but it's going to be a more technical versed user. And just kind of like what we're seeing in tooling like ABBYY Vantage now, where you can essentially create an extraction skill without being a technologist. You don't need to be a technologist to tell the software to train a machine learning model where to extract data. And so just that sort of adoption is going to happen. It's going to be speed. It's going to be quick. We're going to notice gains, but part of it, actually, to answer your question, what I'm excited about, also kind of nervous about, is privacy. Like, that still continues to be a concern. Our customers have a big interest in, hey, Travis, when you do these sort of projects, are you giving our data away to these large hyperscalers? How can we adopt, these sort of mindset without necessarily giving away our whole world? And, obviously we have techniques to that. Naviant has answers for that, but also just the privacy consequence, I think, will be interesting to see how the market reacts to it.
You hit on something that's truly important, Travis. And one of the things for me that is going to be critical to have success in that area is actually enabling people on what it means to leverage these tools, what it means when you enter data into such a platform, and what kind of controls are in place. I actually had an interesting thing happen to me over this week, actually just today on LinkedIn, where, let's just say, a very ambitious salesperson wanted me to be interested in their service that they were offering. And they had taken my LinkedIn profile photo and turned me into an action figure. Cool. It was really fun. Except when you actually think about it, that means that they took proprietary data, which is my picture, my likeness, personally identifiable biometrics, entered it into possibly the free version of a tool. And actually that now meant that I am now the property of that tool. They own me. They can probably use it for training. And something that's very well intentioned, that is, in all honesty, something that did draw my attention, that actually got me thinking like, oh, that's pretty cool. I haven't seen that before. But it is also scary to think that that is how quickly it can happen, that your data goes somewhere where you don't want it to. So if it already happens in something as simple as that, you hit the nail on the head there with, okay, we have to think about all these aspects. We have to make sure that we have this buttoned down. And in my personal opinion, most of all, that people understand that this is something that you have to be thinking about whenever you are using these capabilities and technology.
100%. I'm interested in seeing where the regulation goes, because I think we as a society, we're aware of these concerns, but we're just letting them happen. And that's not uncommon with the speed of technology, but it does feel like there will need to be some sort of control from a personal privacy perspective. Otherwise, these tools are just, they're going to get out of hand the way we adopt them. I mean, the deep fakes, the PII, PHI information, it's bound to cause all sorts of drama in our futures. So,
yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Travis. I think this was one hell of an episode where we really dug into the reality of things and also seeing towards where we're heading in the future, what your perspective was on that. And it was great to have a digital transformation veteran on the episode with us. Marlena, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, but I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, was super interesting and inspiring. Thanks for being here, Travis.
Thanks for your work. Appreciate the podcast. Thank you much.
Awesome. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Marlena, and our audience. See you next time.